Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's great to see so many of you here today, especially when we couldn't give you much notice about what was happening. We were slightly worried, when can we tell you, will you be able to be here? For those who don't know me, I'm Judith Cruikshank. I am the chair of the Scotland Board for the Royal Bank of Scotland and the regional managing director of the commercial business here in Scotland. Now, given the hottest topics around just now, when we told you we had some stellar guests coming today, it could really only be one of three things: an Olympic athlete, Taylor Swift, or a political leader. Olympic athletes are old hat. We had Victoria Pendleton here yesterday. We've been there, we've done that. I'm not wearing nearly enough sparkles for it to be Taylor Swift. So I am delighted to be joined this morning by Rachel Reeves, Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, and by Anas Sarwar, MSP and leader of the Scottish Labour Party. And the one person I know, and I think the only person I know, who spends more time talking to Scottish businesses than I do. So this is a rare opportunity for you guys to ask questions of two of the UK's most senior political figures ahead of the general election on the 4th of July. It's a really great opportunity, I think, and a privilege to be able to host. This is an individual event. It's about you as individuals asking about the things that matter most to you. However, knowing a lot of you and knowing how much you all care about our customers, I won't be surprised if we hear some questions which are about what affects them more broadly as consumers or as business and commercial customers. Anas and Rachel are going to start by sharing some personal reflections, and then they will open to the floor for questions. So do please get thinking about what you would like to ask. We've got about half an hour. We'll see how we go. I think it's going to be a really informative and valuable session. As you know, ground rules before we start, NatWest Group is a politically neutral organisation. We have hosted events and visits from all of the UK's main political parties over the years. We think it's really important for colleagues to get the opportunity to hear from some of the bank's key stakeholders, particularly at times like this when we've got an election upcoming. So please take advantage of the opportunity today. Do get your questions in. And I would love now to hand over to Anas Sarwar.
Judith, thank you. Judith, thank you so much, and thank you to the Royal Bank of Scotland for the fantastic opportunity to come and share some thoughts with you today. I know from our conversations how serious RBS is about growing Scotland's economy and making sure we have a genuine partnership, not just between business and the Scottish Government, but between business, Scottish Government, UK Government, and of course local government, to make sure we're maximising the opportunities for communities right across Scotland. I want to start by saying right from the outset that it's no accident that the number one priority for the Labour Party in this election campaign, and the number one priority for Labour in government if we have the good fortune of being elected on the 4th of July, will be to deliver economic growth. And the reason why I say that is because people will look at the Labour Party and view it, of course, as a vehicle for social change. And of course, I'm biased. I will always argue that Labour is the best vehicle to deliver that social change. But what I, Rachel and Keir recognise is that you can only deliver social change if it's backed up with a strong, growing economy. And that's what we want to deliver. That's the only way that we can attract, of course, good jobs here in Scotland, well-paid jobs here in Scotland, successful businesses here in Scotland, but also attract the income we need to inspire you to help us build the businesses of the future and, of course, generate the receipts we need in order to invest in reforming our public services. And we've been really clear in Scotland about what those opportunities for growth are. One, how we maximise Scotland's influence by selling brand Scotland. You all know, wherever you go in the UK, wherever you go in the world, you tell them you're from Scotland and you get invariably a positive response. How do we tap into that soft power of Scotland to generate more exports out of Scotland and create more jobs here at home? The way I think about it is we've spent the last 17 years trying to sell Scotland to the Scots. When we already know how brilliant Scotland is, I want us to go back to selling Scotland to the rest of the UK and to the rest of the world, because that's good for our economy. The second is around digital innovation, and tech and the financial services industry is absolutely at the heart of that. You are generating around 13,500 tech-skilled jobs right here in Scotland, but we are only generating around 5,500 tech-skilled graduates here in Scotland. How do we bridge that divide to make sure you have the workforce you need in order to inspire you to help us make those investments we want to see here in Scotland. And that third area of growth is, of course, how we maximise the opportunity of the clean energy revolution, partly backed up by GB Energy, a publicly owned energy company headquartered here in Scotland. And that's not some kind of ideological attempt to nationalise our energy industry, far from it. What it's about is inspiring confidence to inspire your industry and companies across the globe to invest here in Scotland and the wider UK so we can maximise the opportunities of creating more jobs, lowering people's bills, having greater energy security and demonstrating that climate leadership here in Scotland. And one of the things that I am really passionate about, and you will see this from your day-to-day work, you will understand the importance of partnership and working together. You see it from business to business, you see it from industry to industry, you see it from client to client, or indeed within your own workplace as well. And so what we want to do through this election is get back to having a devolution settlement that isn't about two governments picking fights with each other and ultimately failing Scotland, but actually two governments working together and delivering for the people of Scotland. And that's why this opportunity for us is to build a genuine partnership where we in Scotland work hand in glove with Keir Starmer as our Prime Minister and with Rachel Reeves as our Chancellor to make sure we're maximising the economic firepower of Scotland. And I think the opportunities in that are absolutely incredible. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce my good friend Rachel. But before I do, I just want to make comment about the last Labour Chancellor, who I know was so well known to people in this room and particularly to the city of Edinburgh. Alistair Darling was a titan of the Labour family and the Labour movement, someone who was passionate about Edinburgh, passionate about the financial services industry, and passionate about Scotland. And he was a mentor of Rachel's. And I think if Rachel can learn from that great talent that he had, humility he had, and the idea that politics wasn't about self-interest, it wasn't about putting your party first, it was always about the national interest and delivering for working people across the country. And I know in Rachel Reeves we have someone that embodies those very values. We were fortunate that the last Labour Chancellor was, of course, a Scot, and I'm really proud, and I hope that after the election on the 4th of July, if we have the good fortune of winning that election, we will have the first ever female Chancellor across the UK, and that will be Rachel Reeves. Please give her a very warm welcome.
Thank you. Well, thanks very much, Anas, and a huge thanks as well to you, Judith, and RBS for hosting us here today. Before I became a Member of Parliament, I worked in financial services, first at the Bank of England as an economist, and then in retail banking. So I know the importance of financial services, both as a direct creator of jobs and prosperity in so many parts of the country, not least here in Edinburgh, but also the wider importance of financial services to finance growth in the rest of the economy. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. But first, let me say a little bit about what our main offer is at this election. And Anas set that out a little bit in his remarks. This is a change election, and stability is change after the 14 years that we've had. And this election is about turning a page on 14 years of chaos and bringing stability back, particularly bringing stability back to our economy. Because it's only with stability that we can grow our economy and improve living standards for ordinary working people. And it's only with stability that businesses can plan with confidence for the future. And so that's why I've been really clear. The first step that an incoming Labour government would take on economic policy is to bring that stability, that much-needed stability back to our economy. Stability through a tough set of fiscal rules. We will get debt down as a share of GDP. We will pay for day-to-day spending through tax receipts, and then only subject to those rules will we invest in the things that are essential for growing our economy. And I'll say a little bit about some of those big opportunities as I see them. But stability on its own is not enough. We also need investment. Investment with a new modern industrial strategy, government and business working together in partnership to exploit the huge opportunities that we have as the United Kingdom and the huge opportunities that we have here in Scotland. a new national wealth fund to invest alongside businesses in some of the low-carbon industries of the future, because there we have huge potential to be a global leader. And I don't want to find that in years to come we are importing all of our energy because we fail to seize at this moment the opportunities around floating offshore wind, carbon capture and storage, and green hydrogen. I want Britain, I want Scotland to be a leader in those industries of the future. And of course, GB Energy, a wholly publicly owned energy company, earning returns for the taxpayer that we can reinvest in those industries to ensure that we get the lower bills that we really need after the volatility we've seen in energy markets and the huge increases in prices these last few years, to bring good jobs, particularly here to Scotland, and also to take Putin's boot off our neck so that we are more self-sufficient in our basic energy needs. So that is why we are doing the National Wealth Fund. And alongside stability and investment, we also need reform. And an incoming Labour government would work with the Scottish government, and I hope in the future with Anas leading that Scottish government, to reform our economy. Reform our planning system so we can get Britain building again, the housing we need, the transport infrastructure that we need, the digital infrastructure that we need as citizens and businesses need to have the confidence to invest. Reform as well of our pension system to get higher returns for pension savers and unlock some of the long-term patient capital that small businesses, start-up and scale-up businesses need to grow. And reform too of our skills system so that young people are leaving school and college and university with the skills that they need to succeed in the changing world of work, but also the skills that businesses like RBS and so many of your clients need to compete here in Scotland, but also internationally. So that's our offer: stability, investment, and reform to grow our economy and tackle the cost of living crisis. What is the role of Scotland in all of this? Well, I think there are two big areas that I would identify. First of all, in some of those low-carbon industries of the future. The North Sea has powered the Scottish economy and powered the UK economy, and the role of oil and gas will continue for many decades to come. But we want to see it beyond many decades. We want to see the future of the North Sea well into the future. And that's why investment with the National Wealth Fund and GB Energy is so important to get those new industries going. Whether that's carbon capture, green hydrogen, floating offshore wind, making sure our ports are ready for the renewable industries of the future. And that's why so many of our policies, the extension of the windfall tax on the big profits that the energy giants are making, and ploughing that money, investing that money into the industries of the future so that we have a safe and a strong and a secure future for the energy sector here in Scotland. And of course, in financial services. I said at the beginning, I recognise the huge value that financial services play in our economy. And I was proud, alongside Keir and Anas, to launch Labour's review into financial services here in Edinburgh last December. We published that review in February, and we want now to take the findings of that review into government to really build on the success of both London and Edinburgh in being hubs for financial services industries, in embracing AI and new technologies so that we can dominate and compete in some of those big opportunities going forward. And so we can, in the UK, including here in Edinburgh, be a hub for sustainable finance investment. Because as we are going to be ploughing money into those industries, and as investors around the world are going to be investing in those industries, we want to be designing the products, doing those deals here in Edinburgh and in London and the other financial hubs as well. So in those two industries, we want to maximise the potential, turbocharge the Scottish economy so that all parts of the United Kingdom can contribute to that #1 mission that a Labour government has, to have the fastest growing G7 economy. We can only do that with the contributions of everyone in all parts of our country, in every nation and region of our country. We've got huge potential here in Scotland. I don't think it has been fully realised these last 2 years. I'm determined that a Labour government working with Scottish Labour realises that potential. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Rachel. We're now going to we'll take some questions. If anyone wants to pop their hand up, we'll take a question. I'll take yourself, and then I'll come to that side. We'll go back and forth. On you go. I think they want the microphone to come.
You've spoken about growing the economy, so I'd be really interested to see how you think banks will play a role in that, and also what you will do to help banks to play as big a role as possible?
Yeah.
Thank you. On you go, Rachel, and then we'll take another question.
Yeah. So at the moment, I think that financial services employs around 235,000 people here in Scotland, and so many of those jobs are in Edinburgh and the surrounding areas. The exports, we are the second biggest exporter of business and financial services of any country in the world. So we've got huge opportunities here, but it's also a very competitive industry. We've seen since Brexit some jobs moving to other European Union countries. We've also seen the growing of the FCA rulebook, now 10,000 pages. So we want a simplification of that rulebook. We want reform of our pension sectors, a consolidation of our pensions industry to really drive growth, better returns for pension savers, but also helping to fund some of those start-up and scale-up businesses. And we see two particular areas that are going through rapid transformation at the moment. So the growth of new technologies and particularly AI. We want to embrace that because we think that our skills from our great universities, from our financial services sector, but also our strengths in digital technologies means that we can be leader in that sector and also in sustainable finance. I think that the UK has a greater chance of being the global hub of sustainable finance than any country in the world. And that's partly because of our industrial heritage, and it's partly because of the skills we've already amassed in that sector. And if we can do that in a fast-growing sector, that bring here to the UK and here to Edinburgh those jobs, I think that's a really exciting opportunity. And that's why that combination of the National Wealth Fund and GB Energy alongside the skills and talent we have in financial services, I think is a great partnership and something we really want to exploit and build on.
Thank you. I'll take the gentleman at the back, and then I'll come to the lady at the front. On you go. Yep, you, sir. No problem.
You spoke about collaboration between the UK government and Scotland if there's a Labour government in Westminster. Given that we might have to wait until 2026 for change in Holyrood, how do you think you'll actually work with the SNP, albeit minority SNP administration in the meanwhile?
Well, can I just say first thing on that, and then I'll ask Rachel to come in, is that we're always going to put the national interest first. And I think one of the big challenges we've had over the last 14 years UK-wide and in the last 17 years here in Scotland is so often there have been manufactured fights and manufactured agreements, which was never meant to be the intention of devolution. Devolution was always meant to be about, of course, having Scottish solutions to Scottish problems, but being willing to work together when it was in our national interest. And that's the approach we will take. We will not try and pick fights. We will try and work in Scotland's interest. Ian Murray, who's here, who would be our Secretary of State for Scotland if we do get the good fortune of being elected, he'll be there as the delivery unit for Scotland right across the UK, as Scotland's window to the world. Not the UK's eyes and ears in Scotland, but rather it's Scotland's place in how we champion trade, how we champion our role around international development, how we break down the barriers between government departments to make sure that is working together and actually delivering for people. But ultimately, and this is a question coming to 2026, ultimately we think the best chance of maximising the delivery and the change is if you have two governments that are willing to integrate and work together in that national interest. But let's sort out this election first in 4 weeks' time, and then we can think about the election in 2026. You want to add anything to that, Rachel? Sorry.
I would just say that the ambition that we have to have the fastest growing economy in the G7 has got to be based on a much broader concept of growth. It's got to be enabling everyone, wherever they live in the UK, to be able to contribute. And I think that for too long, the growth model has relied on small parts of the country and a small number of industries, and we've got to get away from that. So, you know, the jobs in the low-carbon industries of the future are about re-industrialising some of our former industrialised heartlands and giving them an opportunity to succeed. So people don't have to move away from the place they love to do a job they love. And the UK economy is only going to succeed if we maximise the potential of the Scottish economy, and we can only achieve that if we do work together, and that's what we'd be determined to do.
I'll take yourself at the front and we'll get a microphone to you.
Hi, thank you for coming today. My question is, what support are you planning to enable musicians to perform more easily in Europe, which has become a lot more difficult after Brexit?
Great question. You want to go on that first, Rachel, and I'll come in?
Yeah. So we accept the results of the referendum. I voted Remain. I would vote the same way if we went back in time, but it will be 8 years later this month since the result of that referendum. So we accept the result, but what we don't believe is that the deal that was done was the best deal that could be done. And there are a number of areas where we would want to build on the deal that Boris Johnson secured. And I'll just give you 3 practical examples of things that we would want to do differently. The first is that we want to secure a veterinary deal with the European Union to make it easier for our fantastic food and drink and farming industries to be able to trade right across Europe. And we've all seen the increased barriers to that trade. It will actually help the wider economy as well, because so many delays at the border are because of delays in checking food and drink exports and imports. The second area where we want to see change is around supporting the services sector. So we used to have the mutual recognition of professional qualifications across the European Union. That went when that deal was done, because the services sector was essentially sold down the river in those Brexit negotiations. We want to bring that back because our services sector contributes more than 80% of our GDP in the UK, and we want people who are trained up in the UK, whether it's accountants, actuaries, architects, lawyers, to be able to practice their skills all across the European Union. And the third area goes to the question that you asked about our cultural industries. At the moment, you can now only tour for short periods of time, and you have to get a visa for every country that you want to go to. I don't think that anybody voted Brexit to put those barriers in the way of some of our most talented, often young people, musicians, dancers, etc., and you yourself. And I also don't think there's any interest in the European Union restricting British artists from being able to tour. So those would be the 3 areas that we have as immediate priorities for improving on that Brexit deal. But I think there's a wider point here about how we approach our relations with the European Union, and we want to reset those relations. It has been far too adversarial for far too long, even after the referendum, even after the deal, that the UK government always wants to sort of pursue a vengeance rather than find common ground. And so we want a reset of that relations, because we believe it's in our national interest to have strong relations, whether it comes to the economy or indeed when it comes to national security and defence. And we're determined to reset in order to get those improvements that we think would help the UK economy and everyone that lives here.
I would emphasise that last point, similar to the last question, which is it's not just about, politicians deliberately trying to pick fights, whether that's Scottish and UK ones on the UK constitutional question or UK ones with EU officials because of the Brexit situation. We want to fix the mess, we want to reset the relationship, and we want to work together when it's in our national interest. That's good for our economy, it's good for people here, and that's the approach we want to take in government. I'll take yourself.
Thank you. It was great to hear about your support for business, and for me it is, what are you doing about the support for social enterprises who across the UK and in particular in Scotland are picking up the pieces because of the impact of austerity? And a cheeky other question, what are you doing for women so that we will vote for you?
I'll take the social enterprises and you can... That's probably a fair balance. First of all, the social enterprises, I think one of the challenges we've got in Scotland is we have a really cluttered enterprise agency landscape. We've got over 100 public sector bodies now. They're doing individually good things, but it doesn't feel like there's a joint-up strategic approach. So we want to declutter that landscape. We want to put an economics unit front and centre in the First Minister's office that coordinates that national strategy, but also develops regional economic strategies as well, to make sure individual organisations or businesses aren't just passed from one organisation to the next and ultimately getting nowhere. So part of it is UK-wide, delivering stability, getting growth back into our economy, genuine partnership and investment coming from the UK into Scotland, and then using the levers we have here in Scotland to make sure that's done in a way that fits the regional economic development we need to see in different parts of the country. And that has to be a mix. It's partly social enterprises, it will partly be wholly private-owned companies, it will be cooperatives, it will be employee-owned businesses, it will be the full mix. But I think that has to be the approach, looking for those sectors that are going to be those areas for growth. And specifically on austerity, there will be no return to austerity. We are talking about growing our economy so we can get more money back into our public services and more money to invest in the economy of the future. Rachel.
So the position of Chancellor of the Exchequer has existed for 800 years now, and every single person who's occupied that post has been a man. I would be the first female Chancellor of the Exchequer, and that would be a big privilege of my life. But with it, I think would come an immense responsibility to pass on to our daughters and our granddaughters a fairer and more equal society. Just one example of that is that the gender pay gap today is still 14%. So women are still paid on average 14% less than men. And I'm determined to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer that closes that gender pay gap once and for all. Now, there's a whole variety of things that need to be done to achieve that. Better childcare is really important, because the truth is it is still mums who do the vast majority of childcare. Also improving social care, because a lot of women leave the labour market early to care for elderly parents and indeed for their grandchildren, because their children can't get good childcare for their kids. And also about better careers advice in our schools, so that young people, particularly young women, know about the jobs and the opportunities that are out there. And I think if we do some of these things, and I hope also I can be a role model in that role, to close the gender pay gap for once and for all would be, for me, an amazing achievement and something I'm determined to do.
Excellent. I'm going to go over this side and then we'll come back to the middle section so no section feels neglected. On you go. Hello,
thank you. Taylor Swift is in Edinburgh this weekend on her Eras tour. I'd like to ask, what era is the Labour Party in?
From a Swiftie approach, is it? Well, I come from a 90s kind of R&B, hip-hop, kind of Dr. Dre era. I'm not sure that's the era we want to go for. I'm currently in the, Bruno Mars kind of era. Going into the future, I'm not sure. Are you a Swiftie, Rachel, are you?
So I'm a massive Beyonce fan.
Oh, yeah.
I did see her last year. But I'd say when Judith said, it could have been Taylor Swift, I don't know about your children, but my daughter is 11 years old. And if it was a chance between hearing me and Anas or Taylor Swift, I know which one she would choose.
Although I've got a controversial one on that, is I was at the Scotland-England game at Murrayfield, and the head of events at Murrayfield very kindly said to my son who was with me, he said, I'll get you a ticket for Taylor Swift if you like. And he just turned and looked at him and said, no thanks, I hate Taylor Swift. He was the least popular person at school when he went back. I'll take yourself, sir.
Hi. This is probably a little bit of a follow-on from the previous question, because I work full-time, but I'm also an unpaid carer for my wife. So, basically, unpaid carers, as you well know, have been propping up social care for years, especially the ones who are in work as well. Quite frankly, we're on our knees. So what can a future Labour government do to fix social care, but as part of that, not only enable working carers to stay in work, but also help other carers who can't work at the moment to get back into the jobs market, because there's a huge skills gap, and that would really help to fill that skills gap.
Yeah.
Can I go first? Just obviously, social care is being wholly devolved, and one of the big challenges we've got with what's happening with the squeeze on local government in particular, because so much of social care is actually delivered by local government, and when you squeeze local government budgets so tight, and when they've got no choice but to then be cutting social care services and social care packages, it has a massive knock-on effect onto the acute system as well. So the challenges we've got is we've got people who really struggle to get into hospital because of the long waiting times. We then have lots of people who struggle to get out of hospital because of the scale of delayed discharge. And then there's an imbalance between those that require the care at home and those that require care in care homes. And then that adds even more pressure on those who have caring responsibilities across the country. And that impacts on their own health, impacts on their mental health, impacts on their ability to access the wider labour market. And there also has a negative knock-on effect in terms of putting people into poverty and the challenges in alleviating that poverty. How we fix that is partly greater investment, and that's why I'm really pleased we're going to scrap the non-dom tax loophole, for example, to put more money into our NHS, which will create around 160,000 more appointments here in Scotland. But fundamentally how we're going to change it is we have to move away from our managerial heavy system and use that money instead to put it directly into services. We have a population of 5.5 million people in Scotland, but we have 50 boards in Scotland. We don't need 50 chief execs, we don't need 50 finance directors. We should be spending less money on the managerial layer and more money directly on the nurses, the carers, the consultants and the doctors, and that's the model we'd seek to pursue in the road to 2026. Rachel?
I just had a couple of things. Keir Starmer said at the weekend that he wants to see the proportion of people of working age in work increase from where it is today at 75% to 80%. And we'll only be able to do that if we do harness the talents of everybody in society and give people more support to be able to combine, a bit like my answer to the previous question about why women leave the labour market, to compare to be able to do both the caring side of their roles and also to be able to work. And one of the things that Labour's New Deal for Working People is all about is giving people greater security in the labour market and also greater rights to work from home and request flexible working, because one of the things that I know is a real barrier for people staying in work, and we know that the best thing to do is to help people stay in work, because once they leave the labour market it's really hard to get back in. But if we can have that greater flexibility in the workplace, and I know that big employers like RBS will do what they can on that front, but there are many employers who are not granting that flexibility to help people to stay in the workforce and continue to contribute. And we're only going to achieve our potential as a country if we ensure that more people can combine those different roles that they have both at home and in the workplace.
Julia, we're going to take the lady here and then we'll go over to that side over there. Is that okay? Thank you.
So you've both spoken quite a bit about economic stability, but what are Labour's plans to tackle to provide government stability and tackle corruption and hold MPs to account?
But I'll let you go on that one, Rachel, because obviously you've talked a lot about the COVID Commissioner in particular in other areas, so I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so I'll say something about particularly my brief on the economy and then a sort of a wider point. During the pandemic, we saw tens of billions of pounds handed out, frankly, to friends and donors of government ministers, and also contracts handed out that didn't deliver against the specifications, and then no effort to claw back that money. Now, I know from when I worked in business, if you contracted stuff out, you would have clawback clauses in any contract, so if the contract didn't deliver, you'd be able to get your money back. That hasn't happened on this occasion. And I've said that if I become Chancellor of the Exchequer, we will create a COVID corruption commissioner to go through line by line every contract that didn't deliver and do everything in our power to get that money back. Because those billions of pounds, they belong in our frontline public services, whether it is caring, whether it is social care, whether it is better childcare, whether it is better schools and NHS. That's where it belongs, not in the pockets of people who used the COVID pandemic as an opportunity to line their own pockets when others made huge sacrifices. So for me, that is something that I'm really determined to do, to get that money back and send a signal that never again can a national emergency be used as an opportunity to line your own pockets. It's just frankly unacceptable. More widely, I think there is a big issue. One of the reasons why we worry about turnout in elections, and particularly in this election, is that people are disillusioned. Yes. They don't like what they see in politics. They don't like the fact that somebody who's on the police investigation can still rock up to the House of Commons and take part in votes. Those sorts of things shouldn't be happening. They wouldn't happen at RBS if somebody was being investigated, especially for sexual misconduct, that they could just pop back to the office the next day, and yet that happens in the House of Parliament. And so, as well as tackling that fraud that I've spoken about, we need to raise standards in public life. Politics is about service, and I think sometimes, over the last few years, some people have lost sight of that. And what Keir talks about, I think very powerfully, is bringing that element of service back. We're not here for ourselves, we're here to serve the people who put us into the jobs that we're doing. And I think a bit more focus on that and a little bit less focus on oneself would be a welcome change.
Absolutely, absolutely. We'll take the question there and the gentleman behind.
Hi.
You're both fighting over the mic there for a second.
This year's school leavers were the cohort who were still in the broad general education phase of school when COVID happened, when they were asked to stay at home to protect older generations. And since that time, we've seen the social contract degrade for young people, where the expectation that they can leave school get a really good job or go to college or go to university or travel the world with ease or work in Europe. All of that is gone, and an ability to get a house is something for a lot of young people as a pipe dream now. So I'd like to know, what's Labour's offer to young people? How are you going to rebuild and reconstitute that social contract for young people?
Great question. I'll go first, Rachel. I think you have to look at this in lots of different layers, because you're totally right that so many young people, if you think about those that were really, really young, there's a disproportionate amount of those children who have real issues around ENT and getting proper diagnosis, proper support and proper catch-up, which hasn't yet happened. One of the things that we were pushing for was a full, proper mental health assessment to be done for children that were most impacted by the COVID period, to make sure that there wasn't a lasting impact on them that impacted on their exam results, for example, and then access to education skills and employment. So it's partly around health and access to health. Skills and training as well. Right now it feels like we have a all or nothing approach to our education system. We've got huge infrastructure around a clearing system and all the rest of it to try and get young people into university and into college. But what happens to that large group of kids that don't want to go down the academic route, but actually want to go down a more technical route? And that's where a huge skills gap exists in Scotland and right across the wider UK. And so we've got to reform our skills system. That's partly what we do with the apprenticeship levy. The apprenticeship levy for me is not fit for purpose. I know it's something that Rachel talks a lot about in England and Wales as well, is how do we reform our apprenticeship levy to make sure there is genuine partnership with business around that skills. And then lifelong learning as well. The way I often think about it is, my parents' generation, they probably only worked about 3 or 4 jobs in their lives. Our generation will work around 5 or 6 jobs in our lives. It's predicted the next generation will work 11, 12, 13 jobs in their life. What does that mean for lifelong learning? What does that mean for the support that they need as individuals? But actually, what does it also mean for businesses? Because lots of businesses will invest a lot of time and energy and money into a young person, and then 4 or 5 years later, that person might be gone. How do you incentivize them to continue to make those investments to attract a workforce, retain a workforce, or then retrain a workforce, depending on the pipeline going forward? And therefore, all of this has to be about how we build an economy for the future, how we build a healthcare system for the future, how you partner skills alongside your jobs market. And right now, it feels there's too far a gap between that. Rachel?
I know a lot of these areas are devolved, but I'll just add a couple of small things. One of our commitments, but this would be for England, but obviously the Barnett consequences would flow to Scotland, is to have a mental health hub at every secondary school, and also improve access, as Anas said, to speech and language therapy at primary schools. And we would hope that those Barnett consequentials would be used similarly. On the apprenticeship levy, the truth is the number of apprenticeships is falling, and many businesses, including big businesses, but even more so for smaller and medium-sized businesses, are not able to use the apprenticeship levy because it doesn't have enough flexibility in it. So one example that I've used before, that one business told me about, was that, and this was in the West Midlands, where you've got a big car manufacturing sector, and they couldn't use the apprenticeship levy to retrain people who are working today on internal combustion engine cars. But they could get rid of all those workers and bring in apprentices and train them to build electric vehicles. That makes no sense at all, and it is about the rigidities of the apprenticeship levy. So we want to reform the apprenticeship levy, turn it into a growth and skills levy, and of course we'd want to work with the Scottish Government. Just one last thing, home ownership is falling today. And young people, again, what Anas has said about our generation, I was able, and I didn't have wealthy parents, but I was able to get on the housing ladder in my 20s. I'm not convinced that my children will be able to do that. And in big cities like Edinburgh, like London, like Leeds, where I'm an MP, those things are real challenges. And so we need to be reforming the planning system to ensure that we can build the houses that our young people and our families need, because it is not good enough that people who want to buy are stuck in the private rented sector with all the insecurity that has. That is not a great way to start a family. We don't have enough social housing, and we don't have enough housing that people can afford to buy, and that's one of our commitments as well.
Thank you, Richard. I'm told there's a mic up in the balcony as well. There's anyone up there that wants to ask a question? Don't feel left. I see a young man there, so I'll take the gentleman here. We'll go there, and then we'll come to the gentleman at the back.
It's just one following on from quite a few of the questions before. Child poverty, in the past 17 years here in Scotland, child poverty rates have pretty much remained the same. But if you look at the evidence, most of those are actually, their parents are in employment, they're in full-time employment. So what specifically would a Labour government do to try and eradicate child poverty and increase people's living standards?
Thank you. Do you want to go first on that, Rachel, and then I'll come in?
So look, we've committed to reviewing how the universal credit system and the rollout is going, because we know that often it disincentivises people from taking extra hours at work, for example. But also the New Deal for Working People that I mentioned in answer to a previous question, to ban exploitative zero-hour contracts, to get rid of fire and rehire, and for the first time turn the minimum wage into a genuine living wage, because I strongly believe that if you go out to work, you should have the security and dignity that comes from work. And at the moment, too many people don't have that security because they don't know what hours they're working from one week to the next, and they don't have the dignity because they're reliant on benefits to top up their income because the minimum wage doesn't go far enough. So those commitments are around ensuring, because 60% of children who grow up in poverty today have at least one parent that is working. And so tackling some of those issues by making work pay through the New Deal for Working People is a really important part of our offer.
And just to emphasise on that is, I think in Scotland, quite frustratingly, often the debate about poverty centres solely around welfare. Of course, welfare is one important tool, but we in the Labour Party believe that the best route out of poverty is work. And that's why our New Deal for Working People will give a pay rise to around 200,000 Scots by delivering that genuine living wage. But the other ways you lift people out of poverty is, of course, around our education system. And far too many kids are having resources taken out of the classrooms, whether that be teachers, additional support needs teachers, or indeed resources in the most working class communities. That has to be fixed. Housing is another huge lever in terms of lifting people out of poverty. How we properly regulate, for example, our rental market, how we encourage the ease of more affordable home buying, how we up the affordable housing budget, which has been cut by £200 million here in Scotland. And then going back to the earlier question about skills and how you match skills with the economy, that is a suite on how you actually lift people out of poverty and have a genuine anti-poverty strategy. And the last thing I'd say on this is fighting poverty is in Labour's DNA. It's what we do. And the last Labour government lifted 1 million children out of poverty. And this next Labour government, if again we get the honour of serving, will have tackling poverty as a key mission of that government. I'm going to go to someone up. Oh, there we go, he's got a mic already, look at that.
Thank you, Rich. People where I'm from in Aberdeen are really worried about the energy transition and being left behind. What will you both do to alleviate that worry and that fear? Do
you want to go first on oil and gas and I'll come in?
Yeah, sure. So we would not revoke any licences that have already been granted, and we would work with the energy companies to ensure that they can get all the oil and gas that is associated with those licences. But what we won't be doing is granting new oil and gas licences, and instead we will be encouraging, through the National Wealth Fund with an endowment of £7.3 billion and with GB Energy with an endowment of £8.3 billion, invest in the new industries, the growing industries, because we don't just want to preserve an industry which, whatever your policy is a declining industry. We want growing industries in the northeast of Scotland and indeed in the northeast of England, which is why our priority is investing alongside businesses in things like carbon capture and green hydrogen. And the great thing about the industrial heritage and the industrial skills that we have in the northeast of Scotland means that there's every reason to believe that Britain and Scotland can be global leaders in those new industries. We will need those oil rigs, we will need those people who worked in that sector, we will need those facilities to be able to store the carbon, and we will need those skills to be able to build the offshore wind platform. So this is about not reducing the number of jobs in the energy sector in Scotland, but committing to 69,000 new jobs in the energy sector in Scotland, and jobs that people working in the energy sector today can do, but also additional jobs that young people coming out of school and college and university can do as well.
And I would just add one thing to that. I think it's a really important question, because I think it is right that we give reassurance to businesses and workers in the North East. There will be no cliff edge. There will be no turning off of the tap oil and gas will play a significant role for decades to come. That's partly around protecting jobs and protecting the economy in the northeast. But it's also because if we are to see the large-scale investments we need to see in the transition, then that has to be a genuine partnership with those businesses to inspire them and give them confidence to help us make those investments to realise that full potential of that transition. We absolutely agree, we all collectively agree needs to happen. And that partnership and collaboration is an absolute commitment, both from I hope, incoming UK Labour government, but also from us here in Scotland. Final question, I'm told, from the gentleman at the back. We'll get a mic to you.
Thanks very much. Thank you. I'm just wondering, is it appropriate that the UK spends $6 billion on trade with Israel every year when they continue to be in illegal occupation of Palestinian land, when they continue expanding illegal settlements, and when they continue to subject Palestinians to life under apartheid? And if not, what sanctions and divestments would a new Labour government implement?
Can I just come on that first? I think it's really important in this conflict to recognise that what we are collectively calling for is for people to be able to live with peace, freedom, dignity and security, whether they are Palestinian, whether they are Israeli. And to recognise that every life is equal, whether it is a Jewish life, a Muslim life, a Christian life, an Israeli life or a Palestinian life. And what we are all collectively demanding is an immediate end to the violence, an immediate ceasefire, the immediate access to humanitarian aid, the immediate release of hostages, and a pathway to a two-state solution where people can live in that freedom and security. And that's going to require international diplomacy. And I think one of the frustrating things around a lot of this discourse over the last number of months is a pretense that somehow performative actions by a party in opposition or one government alone will ultimately lead to a peace in the Middle East. It is going to require international action, international cooperation, global leadership, something that a UK Labour government is absolutely determined to deliver if we are to realise that peace in the wider Middle East and to build a fairer and more secure world. That is a fundamental commitment. It's what will be in our manifesto, and it's what an incoming UK Labour government would drive towards. Do you want to add anything to that, Rachel? Excellent. So just a final thank you to everybody for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. You can now all stop skiving off from work and get back to work in a moment. Judith.
Brilliant. Thank you both so much for that. And thank you all for your contributions today. I think we could have spent twice the amount of time and not run out of questions. So can I ask you all just to say a big thank you to Rachel and Anas.